Kea Inistano, what the Chago Ekea, what Nas Anoshing, not a disc.
When my parents talked to us about the long walk, they were not in a hateful, they didn't teach hate.
James Henry Carleton died at age 58 from pneumonia in San Antonio, Texas. The date was January 7th, 1873.
It's really a tragic personal story of Carleton, this great soldier, sort of declining into a very feeble man by early 1872, and I think a lot of that decline was a consequence of the enormous pressures he was under in New Mexico during the Civil War, and just the enormous political pounding he took over the Bosque Redondo reservation experiment, which was a complete failure.
The Navajos knew that in time people like Carleton would leave or they would pass away. They could wait them out, they could delay things, they could fight against them in a variety of forms. And in the long run, the Navajos realized that they, in fact, had the upper hand.
Important events were again taking place in the American West. On June 25, 1876, General George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry surprised a village of Lakota Sioux in northern Cheyenne. They were camped along Montana's Little Bighorn River. Custer's men were overwhelmed by a much larger force. The Battle of Wounded Knee took place on December 29, 1890. The location was a desolate plain near Pine Ridge, South Dakota. Wounded Knee was the aftermath of settlers coming into Sioux territory in expansive numbers. About 150 Lakota Sioux, including women and children, were killed. 25 military men were dead. The provision for education was an important part of the 1868 treaty with Navajos. The treaty states, they pledged themselves to compel their children, male and female, between the ages of 6 and 16 years to attend school.
There was 3 other relative guys of mine that we were all round up, put in a bus and sort of like a cage.
Boarding and day schools were started for Native people. A school was started at Fort Defiance in 1870. Many Navajo parents had concerns about sending children to school.
There was one school principal and superintendent over in Eastern Navajo who was sufficiently embarrassed, chagrined, unhappy, upset, whatever, about the runaways at his school that he actually took the kinds of hobbles you use for horses and shackled runaways, chronic runaways.
A lot of the time it was happy times because my sister was there with me. We shared one bunk bed and she slept the other towards my feet and I slept the other way. And sometimes I could hear her crying and then I would start to cry.
The most famous of the early boarding schools was the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. Carlisle was run by an ex-cavalry officer named Richard Henry Pratt. Pratt's slogan was, "Kill the Indian, save the man."
Pratt wanted photographs, before and after photographs, taken in one of the 2 of the most famous photographs, probably in Navajo history, are of a man named Tom Torlino when he arrived at Carlisle and what he looked like after he'd been there for several years. No one, almost no one anyway, has ever asked about Tom Torlino. What happened to him when he left Carlisle? In fact, he went back to Navajo country and he became a farmer, and I think a fairly successful one.
Carlisle's military regimen was the model for boarding schools at the time. 43 Navajos joined the intertribal population of 10,605 at Carlisle. Carlisle existed from 1879 to 1918. Navajo leader Manuelito was an early advocate of Western education. Manuelito sent 2 sons and a nephew to Carlisle in 1882. All 3 died. A son died at Carlisle. The other 2 died at home from tuberculosis contracted at Carlisle. The visionary Manuelito died in 1894.
And that's the way I felt when I went to boarding school, is I always expecting that I might get killed, or it was scary.
As you can imagine, there were many Navajo children and children from other Indian communities who were not very happy about being essentially incarcerated. And they ran away, and their running away often carried dire consequences or resulted in dire consequences. There were children who died in the snow. There were children who would go to sleep on a railroad track trying to find their way out and be run over by a train. And of course, their running away was the most direct and most effective kind of protest you can imagine, because it simply said that we do not like it here, we do not want to be here, we will do almost anything we can to get away.
Some children never made it home.
If you've ever been in boot camp, that is exactly what they did, is take your identity and try to assimilate you, and it was very harsh.
And we were treated rough all